Hi, Blogging Heads viewers. This is Daniel Strauss of Woodruff and Strauss today. Doing a quick episode with Columbus Dispatch. Is that you have like multiple affiliations? Henry Gomez,
Cleveland. It's actually Cleveland.com and the Cleveland Plain
Dealer reporter Henry Gomez. Sorry.
No problem.
And Henry has been one of the most rabid John Kasich reporters this 2016 cycle. So today we're going to start off talking about Kasich and his anti-Trump sort of uncoordinated efforts, which started with the Super PAC, New Day for America, but quickly moved to Kasich, who I think every day now is doing something attacking Trump. And he's gotten a little bit of a response from the real estate mogul, but not a huge amount. So what have you seen on this?
Yeah, well, it seems like, nothing else that Kasich was trying was really working. He's been stuck in the low single digits. He's not breaking through. He kind of peaked in New Hampshire early. He was up at second place for a while. Now he's back down to fifth or sixth. Other candidates are starting to leapfrog him there. So what it looks to me like he's trying to succeed where others have failed, and that's by tearing down Donald Trump. Every day now he's coming up with one of these web video ads. He's not putting any paid media behind them right now, but you and I are talking about him. Lots of national newspapers are writing about him, and to the extent that it's getting out there in the free media sphere, he's hoping that it'll raise his profile as the guy that was willing to take on Donald Trump. But who knows if it's going to work? Trump, as you mentioned, has sort of responded. He was in Ohio last week and briefly teed off on Kasich, but didn't go incredibly far. Mm-hmm. And it's a risky strategy. It's hard to what's the saying? If you come at the king, you best not miss.
Right.
And
Trump is very proudly touted, like every time he's attacked, the candidate sinks immediately in the polls. And I'm sure I haven't actually seen too much research or polling on why this happens, but it does seem like enough of a pattern. It's Rand, Perry, not Walker, I think, and Jeb, who have all sunk in polling because of this. I think the difference with Kasich right now, though, is that it's not just a candidate doing this; it's his entire campaign and his super PAC. And the subtext of this is "Give us money, and we will be the vanguard to unseat Trump." I think that's why. I mean, that to me is why there's been so much coverage of this. There hasn't been much proof that there's been an overflow, and the reporting I've done with some of my colleagues is that it doesn't, a lot of the GOP establishment is still pretty sure that Trump will just fizzle out before anything gets really serious. I actually, and every time they tell me that, I press them and say, seems really serious right now, but they're emphatic on that point. Is your read that this is like a move of desperation for Trump or for Kasich?
It definitely, I hate to use that word because it's so dramatic, but nothing he's tried has really worked. And, he started telegraphing that he was going to go after Trump about a month ago before the debate out in, I can't even remember where it was, I've lost track, but it was the second to last debate. Mm-hmm. The day before, he lit Trump up in a speech in Columbus, and then he tried that the next night in the debate. And that was the moment where I thought, this is a complete departure from what Kasich's been doing the whole time. I mean, Kasich went out of his way to say early on in his campaign that he wasn't going to pick on Donald Trump and that wasn't what his campaign was all about. I mean, there was a time where he wasn't even going after Hillary Clinton because he wanted to be this adult voice in the room, and that didn't work. He had a really good first debate in Cleveland where he was his debut on the scene in the race, and his numbers went up in New Hampshire right after the debate, and since then, others have had a moment. Kasich hasn't sustained it. Everybody kept asking him at every stop, "How come you're not going after Trump? How come you're not going after Trump?" Because everybody seems to think that the one way a bottom rung candidate can distinguish himself is by going after Trump. So finally, I think Kasich gave into the temptation and tried it. And, it's been going on in some form or another for about a month. And we haven't seen Kasich's numbers really move at all. He hasn't lost anything, but he hasn't gained. And Trump, as we know, has sort of stayed right around that 25 to 30% mark, and nationally and in the early states.
I mean, the irony, I think, is that the one guy who has tried to stay as positive as possible and avoid attacking Trump is Rubio. And he's done pretty well. And in New Hampshire, for instance, without much campaigning there, he's in like third place, I think, behind Carson and Trump himself. You spent more time up there, up in New Hampshire, following Kasich than I have. Could you talk a little bit about like what the scene is for Kasich in New Hampshire? And I mean, because it also connects to Christie, who's putting a big sort of show of force there too. It's amazing to me why there are so many sort of establishment-aligned candidates who are betting the entire barn on New Hampshire.
Well, it's one factor is what's going to happen on the Democratic side. If it's not really shaping up to be a race, if there's the sense that Hillary Clinton has it locked up, then Democrats or independent-leaning Democrats could, cross over and vote in the Republican primary. There's definitely opportunity for Kasich there. He's probably one of the most liberal, if not the most liberal Republicans in the field. And, he has that independent message that he thinks is going to play well. It's funny, before Kasich really got off on his campaign, one of his big things was, I like to tell it like it is. And then Christie launched his campaign, and that was basically the tagline of the Christie campaign. And I remember I talked to Kasich once up in New Hampshire. It was right around the time that him and Christie were, both launching. And I said, what do you and Christie have similar messages. You're both tell it like it is candidates. And Kasich quibbled that he wasn't that Kasich's not a tell it like it is candidate. So he kind of realized that Christie was stepping on his brand there. And I tell you, Kasich draws some decent-sized crowds up in New Hampshire.
Oh, he does.
The people there are very interested in what he has to say. But if you spend any time up there, you know what these people are like. The voters are pros. They tell you afterwards that they really haven't ruled out anybody as a candidate. I think that the more time I've spent up there, their long lists are becoming short lists. But they're very careful not to say the person they just listened to is off their list. They're very polite. And so Kasich's organization up there is pretty solid. He has these former U.S. Senators, Sununu and Humphrey, helping him. Sununu in particular has loaned his political organization to Kasich. And, over the last few months, Kasich's been steadily accumulating New Hampshire operatives and elected office holders and former office holders. That's all been very helpful. To me, the question is now that Christie, has the union leader endorsement, has the plumber endorsements, does that sort of...
Do you think the union leader, one of my editors who actually did his thesis on the effectiveness of a union leader endorsement pointed out to me yesterday that they don't pick winners a lot of the time. They picked Newt in the last cycle.
They picked Pete DuPont in 1988.
Yeah.
that was a
Does anybody even remember Pete DuPont?
Just in What It Takes and all the great books, but
I mean, so I mean, and some of the activists I talked to yesterday point out that union leader's good nationally, but locally, the Renee and Dan Plummer, who are these sort of like shepherds of Republican activists, are way more valuable. Do you think that's going to make a difference?
I don't know that the actual newspaper endorsement is going to make a difference in the long term. What I think it does is it's going to boost some of these national establishment donors who are trying to decide who they're going to get behind to stop Trump. Jeb seems like yesterday's news, and you've got this feeling now that it's going to be Rubio's turn, but there might still be some guys waiting to see if Christie or Kasich catches on. And in that regard, you had the union leader endorsement sort of smacking down first-term senators, elevating the governors, and in particular Christie. And I think that is... Well, it's not necessarily going to deliver the state for Christie. It's going to, possibly stall any momentum Kasich might have hoped of getting in the next month. And a lot of people that might have been on the fence waiting to go to Kasich or Christie are going to be tipped over the edge to Christie.
Right.
But yeah, I agree. The Plummer endorsement is one that's pretty huge, and Kasich certainly wooed the Plumbers when he'd been up in New Hampshire.
So I think any discussion of Kasich right now and Kasich in New Hampshire is incomplete without the John Huntsman comparisons, which seem more and more apt by the day, right? It's not just, but the thing is, where Huntsman is sort of soft-spoken and was always refrained from getting into fights, Kasich does have a combative side to him, right?
Yeah, I think they both take some sense of glee, though, in poking their fellow Republicans in the eye and pointing out all the ways in which Republicans have disappointed them, and obviously they share some advisors, John Weaver being one. The people I've talked to who've worked with both will say that there are big differences between John Kasich and John Huntsman in terms of experience and talent and temperament, which you mentioned, of course. Huntsman was the governor of a relatively small state and the most recent line on his resume was a job in the Obama administration, whereas Kasich is the current governor of a big must-have battleground state and doesn't have as much Obama baggage on his record. He did expand Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act. So yeah, I think sometimes those similarities are unfair and overplayed, but they're there, and it's certainly irresistible to point them out. And if he's perceived as being the Huntsman of the field,
that's not good.
That's not good, and that didn't work out for Huntsman, so it wouldn't work out for Kasich.
I don't know. To me, New Hampshire is turning out to be one of these primaries where I don't know what's going to happen, because I could still conceivably see. It just strikes me that the voters in New Hampshire are, like you said, so good at this game and so experienced in being voters in an early primary state that polling right now could switch from Trump to someone else. Then again, the one time I've been up to New Hampshire this cycle was to a Trump rally, and there were big crowds. It was serious, and this was early in the cycle before sort of Trump had more time where he was the front runner, and he's still leading up there. I was also actually talking to, I don't know, I can't believe I'm going to go on this, but I was actually talking a little while ago to someone in Rob Portman world who floated running for president, and he said to me basically this would not have been a good cycle for Rob Portman to run because the anti-establishment fervor is stronger than it's ever been, and there ain't nobody there isn't anyone as establishment as Rob Portman, which I completely buy. But still, I've always sort of associated Portman, one of your home state's senators, with Paul Ryan and sort of the senior statesman of the GOP. Does that jive, or is he too boring? He's also he and Kasich don't get along, right?
Oh no, I don't have any evidence they don't get along. They're not extremely close by any means, and they have different staffs and have traveled in different political circles in Ohio, despite being former congressmen. But you bring up a good point. This really, everybody thought this was going to be the year of the accomplished establishment governor. So even that wouldn't have boded well for Rob Portman. But we all thought that this was going to, John Kasich could always argue with the notion that he's an establishment politician because he's kind of quirky and because he's outspoken and does some strange and bizarre things and says some strange and bizarre things. But, the fact that he was fit into this establishment lane tells you something about the dynamics of the race. It would have been a terrible year for Rob Portman to run. And, he recognized that earlier. Kasich thought that this would be the perfect year for somebody like him with his credentials to run, much like the RNC thought that, by doing this autopsy, by changing the process with the debates and the primary calendar, that they were going to be solving all their problems from 4 years ago, seeming out of touch and insensitive and non-inclusive. And as we see that all those plans that seemed they were going to deliver some sensible, professional establishment, trans political figure, they've been wrong.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, they did all this stuff about sensitivity and being stronger on that point, and then lo and behold, the guy leading the field right now is someone who likes to throw bombs and say things that the RNC is not super happy about, and stirs up constituencies that Republicans need to win, or apparently need to. I've read some skepticism on the right that like they need these groups right now and they're a sure thing, and you know.
Yeah, but we have a guy who might be the nominee of the party in Donald Trump, who takes pride in using the phrase "anchor babies" to describe the children of immigrants who come over here, and doesn't and not only he brags about how he gets away with using the phrase and says that using the more politically correct term would take too long, and that is like the antithesis of everything that the RNC set out to do after the last election. So that's where just things are so bizarre right now.
I mean, I also want to hit on one point. Some of your near the end of a piece you did on Kasich's speech last week, you quoted Matt Borges, the GOP chairman in Ohio, saying he talked to Trump and sort of like told him to just chill out a little bit on attacking Kasich. What was that about? You don't usually see chairmen doing that, and I'm not super familiar with Matt.
Matt's a very strong Kasich ally, but he's also chairman of the Ohio Republican Party, and so whoever the nominee is, Matt Borges is going to have to work to help elect. And but he's definitely a Kasich supporter, and he showed up at this event in his capacity as the Ohio Republican Party chairman, and was given an audience with Trump beforehand. And I think that Borges says that his point is that Trump is not going to endear himself to the case. I mean, John Kasich controls the Ohio Republican Party. Matt Borges is his handpicked party chairman. He controls the 66 members of the state central committee, and these are the party's foot soldiers. These are the people that you need to go out and help you if you're going to be a presidential nominee. So I think what Borges was communicating to Trump is, if you win our primary or win the nomination by trashing Ohio's governor, you're not going to be able to count on those people helping you win the general election. And now, the counter to that is Donald Trump doesn't listen to anybody except Donald Trump. So why is he going to listen to Matt Borges?
Because he wants to win, man. I wonder if the Florida GOP feels the same way, right? Like he's got. It's even worse, right? Because Trump has. I mean, Florida politics are their own thing, but he's got two candidates, one of which the party as a whole loves and finds incredibly precious to its future, even if he's not the preferred nominee, Marco Rubio. So it seems like Trump is in kind of a bind in these like coveted primary states or coveted presidential year states.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not as familiar with the party infrastructure in Florida as I am Ohio, but it's going to. Yeah, Trump's risking alienating a lot of party activists that he'd need if he's the nominee.
All right, so I want to close out for a second, Henry, with talking about something I'm very gleeful about, and you, of the few Ohio reporters, don't ever give me shit about being a Michigan Wolverines fan, despite the fact that anytime I open my mouth, I mention that I graduated from there. But last night, the Cleveland Browns had a stupendous game where in the very last few seconds, the kicker's kick field goal was blocked, and it was reversed, and the Baltimore Ravens won in the end. Why do I bring this up at all? Because I don't care about NFL. Because it was so familiar to the Michigan State University of Michigan game where our kicker in the end fumbled, failed, and gave it to Michigan State, which was one of the most heart-wrenching games I had ever seen. And actually, right before that, someone I know and work with on the Hillary campaign texted me and said, "Are you ready for Michigan?" Like right before the kick, was like, "Are you ready for Michigan to botch this play and lose the game?" And so my head was down. during the play, and when I looked up, we had lost. So I don't know. Like, pray tell, what should I make of this?
Well, as familiar as it was to a Michigan fan, it was sadly even more familiar to a Cleveland Browns fan and a Cleveland sports fan in general, because we've been dealing with this disappointment for so long. We haven't won a national sports championship in Cleveland since 1964, also the Browns. That was before the Super Bowl existed, so we can't even say that we've won a Super Bowl. Our baseball team is not very good.
Sherrod Brown's a fan of the Reds or the Indians?
I'm a fan of the Indians.
Wait, Sherrod, but what about Sherrod?
Sherrod's a fan of the Indians.
Okay, you guys are both.
Portman is a fan of the Reds. And our basketball team, though, things are looking up. We've got LeBron James. They went to the finals last year.
The point is the Cleveland game yesterday. All right.
Yeah, the Cleveland Browns are terrible. It's a dumpster fire. I didn't even stay up to watch the end of it, but I, of course, relived this morning when I had about 15 text messages from all my buddies just in total agony over the game, and I felt really good about my decision to fall asleep before the end. So
I'm going to make sure we
killing me.
my friend Dylan Scott, an Ohio native like you, I don't know if he's from, I don't know, he's from the suburbs somewhere. I've been teasing him about it today, and I'm going to make sure in the link section of this episode we have a nice link to the video clip, because it's very important to me.
By all means, man, enjoy yourself.
All right, well, Henry, that is all I've got today. I got to go back, and I'm hoping my editors, who are directly behind me right now, aren't giving me too many looks. Thank you very much for the quick turnaround on this, and I hope I see you out on the trail soon.
All right, see ya. Thanks a lot.
Thanks very much.